The desert heat pressed down like a heavy blanket as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera crouched behind the crumbling concrete wall. His tactical vest was soaked with sweat, and dust caked every inch of his gear. The mission had gone sideways 3 hours ago, and now his 8-man squad was pinned down in what used to be a small marketplace in the outskirts of Fallujah. Rivera wiped the grime from his face and checked his ammunition count. 2 magazines left. Not good. The enemy fire had been relentless since they'd walked into the ambush. What was supposed to be a routine patrol through a supposedly cleared sector had turned into a nightmare when insurgents opened fire from multiple positions. The squad had taken cover in the ruins of what appeared to be an old fruit stand. Concrete blocks and twisted metal provided some protection, but Rivera knew they were sitting ducks if they stayed much longer. The enemy had them surrounded on 3 sides, and their radio was crackling with static. No clear communication with base camp meant no immediate backup. Private First Class Tommy Chun lay flat against the ground next to Rivera, his M4 rifle trained on a doorway 50 meters away. Chun was young, maybe 21, with nervous energy that reminded Rivera of himself 10 years ago. This was only Chun's 3rd deployment, and Rivera could see the fear in the kid's eyes, though Chun was trying hard to hide it. "Sergeant, we need to move," Chun whispered, his voice barely audible over the sporadic gunfire. "They're going to flank us from the east side." Rivera nodded. The kid was right. They'd been in this position too long, and the insurgents were smart enough to know it. Through the gaps in their makeshift fortress, Rivera could see movement in the shadows of the surrounding buildings. The enemy was repositioning, probably planning to hit them from multiple angles. The rest of his squad was spread out along the defensive line they'd hastily established. Corporal James "Tank" Washington was at the far end, his heavy machine gun ready to provide covering fire. Washington was a mountain of a man from Alabama, with arms like tree trunks and a calm demeanor that never seemed to crack under pressure. He'd been Rivera's right-hand man for 2 years, and Rivera trusted him completely. Specialist David Kim was handling communications, though the radio seemed to be fighting him every step of the way. Kim was the tech guy, brilliant with electronics, but still learning the ropes of combat. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted the radio dials, trying to cut through the interference that was blocking their calls for support. Private Luis Morales and Private Jackson Jax Thompson were positioned in the middle of their defensive line, both scanning for targets and conserving ammunition. Morales was a sharpshooter from Texas who could hit a target at 300 meters with iron sights. Thompson was the squad comedian, always ready with a joke to lighten the mood, though he was dead serious when bullets started flying. At the far left, Private Brandon "Doc" Williams crouched with his medical kit ready. Williams wasn't officially a medic, but he'd completed advanced first aid training and served as the squad's field medic when needed. He was a quiet guy from Montana who'd joined the Army to pay for medical school. Rivera had watched Williams patch up wounded soldiers under fire more times than he could count. The sound of Rivera's radio crackling to life broke through his thoughts. Kim's voice came through clearly for once. "Sergeant, I'm getting something from base camp. They're saying our extraction point has been compromised. We need to move to secondary Rally Point Bravo." Rivera cursed under his breath. Rally Point Bravo was 6 blocks away through hostile territory. Moving through the streets would expose them to sniper fire and potential IED attacks. But staying here wasn't an option either. The walls around them were already chewed up by enemy fire, and it was only a matter of time before someone got hit. "Listen up," Rivera called out to his squad, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd led men through hell before. "We're moving to Rally Point Bravo. Tank, you'll provide covering fire from here for 60 seconds while we move to the next building. Chun, you're with me on point. Kim, keep that radio working. Everyone else, stay low and move fast." The plan was simple, but Rivera knew that simple plans had the best chance of working in combat. Complexity led to confusion, and confusion got people killed. He'd learned that lesson the hard way during his first deployment in Afghanistan, when a complicated extraction plan had fallen apart and cost him 2 good friends. Rivera checked his watch. It was 1,400 hours, and the sun was at its peak. The heat would work against them, but it would also work against the enemy. Everyone would be moving slower, reaction times would be dulled, and Visibility would be compromised by the shimmering heat waves rising from the concrete. "Tank, give us a countdown," Rivera ordered, shouldering his rifle and preparing to move. Washington's voice was steady as granite. "Covering fire in 3, 2, 1, go." The heavy machine gun opened up with a thunderous roar, sending a stream of bullets toward the enemy positions. Rivera burst from cover with Chun right behind him, both men running in a crouch toward the partially collapsed building 30 meters away. The distance felt like miles as they sprinted across the open ground. Bullets whined past Rivera's head, kicking up small clouds of dust where they struck the ground. He could hear the distinct crack of AK-47s and the deeper boom of what sounded like a PCAM machine gun. The insurgents were well-armed and well-positioned, which meant this wasn't a random attack. They'd been waiting. Rivera and Chun reached the next building just as Washington's covering fire stopped. The sudden silence was almost more terrifying than the gunfire had been. Rivera pressed his back against the concrete wall and signaled for the next pair to move. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Morales and Thompson made the next sprint, using the same route Rivera and Chun had taken. They moved like ghosts, staying low and using every piece of available cover. Both men had been through multiple deployments and knew how to move in hostile territory. They reached the building without incident, though Rivera noticed Thompson favoring his left leg slightly. Kim and Williams made the final sprint together, Kim clutching the radio while Williams carried both their medical supplies and his rifle. They were the most vulnerable during the move because Kim couldn't return fire effectively while managing the radio equipment. Williams provided what cover he could, but it was a tense 30 seconds until they reached safety. Finally, Washington began his own movement, abandoning the machine gun position and carrying only his sidearm and essential gear. The big man moved surprisingly quickly for his size, using the same route the others had taken. Enemy fire followed him, but Washington reached the building unharmed. Rivera quickly assessed their new position. The building had better cover and multiple exit routes, but it was also closer to enemy positions. Through a gap in the wall, he could see muzzle flashes from windows across the street. The insurgents were definitely moving to surround them. "Kim, any word from base camp?" Rivera asked while scanning for threats. Kim shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. "Still getting interference, Sergeant. Something's jamming our frequencies, or the radio took damage when we first came under fire." Rivera wasn't surprised. The enemy had shown increasing sophistication in their tactics over the past few months. Radio jamming wasn't uncommon anymore, especially in planned ambushes like this one. The squad settled into defensive positions in their new location, but Rivera knew they couldn't stay long. The enemy was adapting to their movement, and staying in one place too long would give the insurgents time to coordinate an assault. They needed to keep moving toward the rally point, but the next leg of the journey would be even more dangerous. Through a crack in the wall, Rivera spotted something that made his blood run cold. 3 men in civilian clothes were setting up what looked like a mortar tube in the courtyard of a building 2 blocks away. If the enemy had indirect fire capabilities, Rivera's squad would be in serious trouble. Their concrete shelter wouldn't protect them from mortar rounds. "We need to move now," Rivera announced to his squad. "They're setting up mortars. Next building is 100 meters north. Same drill as before, but we're going to move faster." The next building Rivera had selected was a 2-story structure that appeared to be an old apartment building. It would give them better visibility of the surrounding area and multiple escape routes if they came under fire again. But reaching it would require crossing a street that was completely exposed to enemy observation. Rivera made a quick decision that would change everything. Instead of moving in pairs, they would move as a full squad, using smoke grenades to obscure their movement. It was riskier because they'd all be exposed at once, but it would also be faster and harder for the enemy to track. "Everybody ready smoke," Rivera ordered, pulling a smoke grenade from his vest. "We throw on my mark and move immediately. Don't wait for the smoke to fully develop." The squad prepared their smoke grenades, each man knowing exactly what he needed to do. Rivera could see the determination in their faces, mixed with the natural fear that came with combat. These were good soldiers who trusted each other and their leader. That trust would either save them or get them all killed. Rivera pulled the pin on his smoke grenade and prepared to throw it. The weight of command pressed down on him harder than the desert heat. 8 men were depending on his decisions, and their families back home were depending on him to bring their sons, brothers, and husbands back alive. "Mark," Rivera shouted, throwing his grenade into the street. 6 more smoke grenades followed, filling the air with thick gray smoke that would provide crucial concealment for the next phase of their escape. Rivera took one last look at his squad, knowing that once they started moving, there would be no turning back. The smoke billowed across the street in thick, choking clouds as Rivera's squad burst from cover. The gray haze provided concealment, but it also disoriented everyone, including Rivera's own men. Moving through smoke was like running blind, trusting only instinct and training to guide them towards safety. Rivera led the charge, his rifle at the ready as he navigated through the swirling smoke. Behind him, he could hear the heavy footsteps of his squad and the sharp crack of enemy weapons firing blindly into the gray cloud. The insurgents were shooting at sounds and shadows, spraying bullets in the general direction of movement. Halfway across the street, Rivera heard the distinct whistle of an incoming mortar round. His training kicked in immediately, and he dove to the ground, shouting "incoming" at the top of his lungs. The mortar round exploded 50 meters behind them, exactly where they'd been positioned just minutes earlier. The blast sent a shock wave through the smoke, clearing some of it away and revealing Rivera's squad scattered across the street. "Move, move, move," Rivera shouted, scrambling to his feet and continuing toward the apartment building. The smoke was beginning to dissipate, and they were becoming visible to enemy spotters again. Another mortar round whistled overhead, this one landing closer, maybe 30 meters to their left. Chen was the first to reach the apartment building, throwing himself against the concrete wall and immediately scanning for threats. One by one, the rest of the squad made it to safety, though Rivera noticed that Thompson was definitely favoring his left leg now. The kid must have twisted something during one of their sprints, but he was keeping up and staying focused. Washington was the last to reach the building, and Rivera could see blood on the big man's left arm. "Tank you hit?" Rivera asked while pulling Washington into cover. Washington looked down at his arm with mild surprise, as if he hadn't noticed the wound until Rivera pointed it out. "Must have caught some shrapnel from that last mortar round, Sergeant. Nothing serious." Williams immediately moved to examine Washington's wound, his medical training taking over. "It's superficial," Williams confirmed after a quick inspection. "Shrapnel tore through the fabric, but barely broke the skin. I'll bandage it up, but you're good to go." Rivera nodded and turned his attention to their new position. The apartment building offered better protection than their previous locations, with thick walls and multiple rooms to provide cover. More importantly, it had stairs leading to a second floor, which would give them an elevated position to observe enemy movements. "Kim, get that radio working," Rivera ordered while scanning the street they'd just crossed. "We need to contact base camp and let them know our situation." Kim was already working on the radio, adjusting frequencies and checking connections. The equipment looked intact, but something was definitely interfering with their communications. "I'm getting some traffic, Sergeant, but it's all garbled. Sounds like there's jamming equipment in the area." Rivera wasn't surprised. The enemy had clearly planned this ambush carefully, choosing a location where they could isolate Rivera's squad and prevent them from calling for backup. But jamming equipment had a limited range, which meant the insurgents had to be operating from somewhere nearby. "Chun, Thompson, take the second floor and set up an observation post," Rivera ordered. "I want eyes on all approaches to this building. Morales, cover the back entrance. Kim, keep working on that radio. Tank and Williams, you're with me on the ground floor." The squad moved with practiced efficiency, each man knowing his role without needing detailed instructions. Rivera had trained with most of these soldiers for over a year, and they developed the kind of teamwork that only came from shared experience and mutual trust. From the second floor, Chen's voice crackled over the squad radio. "Sergeant, I've got movement in the building across the street. Looks like they're setting up firing positions in the windows." Rivera moved to a window on the ground floor and carefully peered out. Through the gaps in the remaining smoke, He could see figures moving in the windows of the building Chun had identified. The enemy was repositioning to get better angles on Rivera's squad. They were also probably calling in reinforcements. "How many do you count?" Rivera asked over the radio. "At least 6, maybe more," Chun responded. "They've got rifles, and I think I saw an RPG. An RPG would be a serious problem. The rocket-propelled grenade could punch through most of the walls in this building, and the explosion would be devastating in the confined space." Rivera needed to either neutralize that threat or get his squad moving again before the enemy could use it. Rivera's tactical mind raced through their options. They could try to suppress the enemy positions with rifle fire, but they were outnumbered and running low on ammunition. They could attempt to continue toward the rally point, but that would mean moving through more open ground under enemy observation. Or they could hunker down and wait for backup, assuming Kim could eventually get through on the radio. A new sound cut through Rivera's thoughts, the distinctive whine of jet engines high overhead. Rivera looked up and saw the contrails of what appeared to be military aircraft. For a moment, his heart lifted with the hope that air support might be on the way. But the aircraft continued on their path without circling or showing any sign of interest in the firefight below. "Sergeant," Williams called out from his position near the back entrance. "I'm hearing vehicles approaching from the south. Sounds like at least 2, maybe 3 engines." Rivera's heart sank. More enemy reinforcements would tip the odds even further against his squad. They were already outnumbered and outgunned, and additional enemy forces would make their situation desperate. Rivera realized they needed to make a decision quickly before they became completely surrounded. "Kim, anything on that radio?" Rivera asked urgently. Kim shook his head in frustration. "Still getting interference, Sergeant. I think I heard something that might have been our call sign, but I can't make out any actual messages." Rivera made a command decision. They couldn't wait any longer for radio contact or backup. They needed to move toward the rally point before the enemy could completely surround them. The next phase of their movement would be the most dangerous yet, but staying put would eventually get them all killed. "Listen up," Rivera announced to his squad over the radio. "We're moving to the next waypoint in 2 minutes. Chun and Thompson, I need you to provide overwatch from that second-floor window. When we move, you lay down suppressive fire on that building across the street. Everyone else, we're going out the back door and moving through the alley system to avoid the main streets." Rivera pulled out his map and studied the route to Rally Point Bravo. The alley system would provide some concealment, but it would also limit their ability to see threats coming. It was a calculated risk, but Rivera judged it better than trying to move through the main streets under enemy observation. The sound of vehicles grew louder, confirming Williams's earlier report. Through the windows, Rivera could see dust clouds in the distance, indicating that multiple vehicles were approaching their position. The enemy was definitely reinforcing, which meant Rivera's window of opportunity was closing rapidly. "Tank, you take point through the alley," Rivera ordered. "Your size might intimidate anyone who thinks about getting in our way. Williams, you're right behind Tank with the medical gear. Morales, you're our rear security. Kim, stay in the middle and keep working on that radio while we move." Washington nodded and moved toward the back entrance, checking his weapon and adjusting his gear. Despite the wound on his arm, the big man showed no signs of slowing down. Rivera had served with Washington long enough to know that Tank would keep fighting until he physically couldn't continue. Rivera took one last look around their defensive position. The apartment building had served them well, but it was time to abandon it before they became trapped. The enemy was closing in from multiple directions, and their only chance was to stay mobile and try to reach the rally point before the noose tightened completely. "Chun, Thompson, give us 30 seconds of suppressive fire starting now," Rivera ordered into his radio. The sound of rifle fire erupted from the second floor as Chun and Thompson opened up on the enemy positions across the street. Rivera could hear return fire immediately, with bullets striking the building around the second-floor windows. The enemy had definitely been waiting for Rivera's squad to reveal their positions. "Go, go, go," Rivera shouted, and Washington burst through the back door into the alley beyond. The alley was narrow and filled with debris, making movement difficult but providing good concealment from observation. Washington moved carefully, but quickly, his rifle trained on the far end of the alley where it intersected with another street. Williams followed close behind, his medical pack bouncing on his back as he tried to keep up with Washington's longer strides. Rivera was the fourth man through the door, and he immediately noticed how much cooler it was in the shadow of the buildings. The sun had been brutal in the open areas, but the alley provided blessed relief from the heat. Unfortunately, it also limited their visibility and created perfect conditions for an ambush. Kim emerged next, still clutching the radio and trying to adjust the antenna while moving. The communications specialist was struggling to keep up with the physical demands of their movement while also managing his equipment. Rivera made a mental note to stay close to Kim in case the younger soldier needed assistance. Morales brought up the rear, moving backwards and covering their withdrawal from the apartment building. The sharpshooter's rifle was trained on the doorway they'd just exited, ready to engage any enemy forces that might try to follow them through the building. From behind them, Rivera could still hear Chun and Thompson laying down suppressive fire from the second floor. The two soldiers were buying valuable time for the rest of the squad to get clear, but Rivera knew they couldn't maintain their position much longer. The enemy return fire was intensifying, and sooner or later, Chun and Thompson would have to abandon their overwatch position. "Chun, Thompson, time to go," Rivera called over the radio. "Break contact, and follow our route through the back door." "Roger, Sergeant," Chin's voice crackled back. "We're moving now." Rivera's squad continued through the alley system, weaving between buildings and using every available piece of cover. The route was longer than moving through the main streets, but it kept them hidden from enemy observation. Rivera could hear the sound of vehicles growing closer, and occasionally he caught glimpses of armed men moving between buildings in the distance. The enemy was definitely conducting a coordinated search, probably using the vehicles to block escape routes, while foot soldiers swept through the buildings. Rivera's decision to use the alley system was looking smarter by the minute, but they still had a long way to go before reaching Rally Point Bravo. Washington suddenly held up his hand, signaling for the squad to stop. The big man had spotted something ahead that concerned him. Rivera moved up to Washington's position and carefully peered around the corner of the building they were using for cover. 50 meters ahead, the alley opened onto a main street that they would need to cross to continue toward the rally point. But Rivera could see enemy soldiers positioned on both sides of the street, clearly waiting for anyone trying to move through the area. The insurgents had anticipated that escaping forces might use the alley system, and they'd positioned themselves accordingly. Rivera cursed silently. The enemy was showing remarkable tactical awareness, cutting off escape routes and forcing Rivera's squad into increasingly difficult positions. This wasn't the work of untrained fighters. These insurgents had received professional military training from somewhere. Rivera studied the enemy positions blocking their path, counting at least 4 fighters with assault rifles positioned on rooftops and behind vehicles. The insurgents had chosen their positions well, with overlapping fields of fire that would make crossing the street extremely dangerous. Rivera's squad was trapped in the alley system with limited options for advancing toward the rally point. Behind them, Rivera could hear the sounds of pursuit getting closer. Voices shouted in Arabic, and boots pounded on concrete as enemy forces searched the buildings they'd abandoned. Chun and Thompson had successfully broken contact from the apartment building, but the enemy was definitely tracking their movement through the alley system. "Sergeant," Kim whispered urgently, "I'm getting something on the radio. Sounds like our call sign, but there's still heavy interference." Rivera moved to Kim's position and listened to the crackling radio. Through the static and interference, he could make out fragments of what sounded like military communications. Someone was definitely trying to reach them, but the jamming was still too strong for clear communication. Washington crawled back from his observation position at the mouth of the alley. "Sergeant, I count 4 definite targets, but there might be more in positions I can't see. They've got us bottled up pretty good." Rivera nodded grimly. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. They were caught between enemy forces pursuing them from behind and a roadblock ahead. The alley system that had provided concealment was now becoming a trap. Rivera needed to find a way to break contact, and continued toward the rally point before they were completely surrounded. "Morales," Rivera called softly. "What's your ammunition count?" "For magazines plus what's in the weapon," Morales responded. "I've been conserving ammo, but if we get into a sustained firefight, I'll burn through it pretty fast." Rivera quickly polled the rest of his squad and confirmed what he already suspected. They were all running low on ammunition. A prolonged engagement would exhaust their supplies, leaving them defenseless. They needed to find a way around the roadblock without triggering a major firefight. Chun and Thompson finally caught up with the rest of the squad, both breathing heavily from their sprint through the alleys. Thompson was definitely struggling with his injured leg, but he was keeping up and staying focused on the mission. "Sergeant," Chun reported quietly, "we saw at least a dozen enemy fighters moving through the buildings behind us. They're organized, and they're definitely tracking our movement. I'd estimate 15 minutes before they reach this position." Rivera felt the walls closing in around his squad. 15 minutes wasn't enough time to find an alternate route to the rally point, especially with Thompson's injured leg slowing their movement. They needed to either find a way through the roadblock or find a defensible position where they could hold out until backup arrived. Rivera studied his map again, looking for any options he might have missed. The alley system continued for another block before dead-ending at a major boulevard that ran perpendicular to their route. There was also a side passage that led toward what appeared to be an old marketplace, but Rivera couldn't tell from the map whether it was still accessible. "Kim, any improvement on the radio?" Rivera asked hopefully. Kim adjusted the antenna and tried different frequencies, but the interference remained strong. "I'm picking up more traffic, Sergeant, but I still can't make out complete messages. Whatever's jamming us is close and powerful." Rivera made a decision that would prove crucial to their survival. Instead of trying to fight through the roadblock or find an alternate route, they would eliminate the source of the radio jamming. If they could restore communications, they could call for air support or coordinate with other friendly forces in the area. "Listen up," Rivera whispered to his squad. "We're going after the jamming equipment. Kim thinks it's close, which means there's probably a small team operating it from a concealed position. If we can take out the jammers, we can call for support." Washington raised a practical concern. "Sergeant, how do we find the jamming equipment without getting caught in that roadblock?" Rivera pointed to a narrow passage on his map that led away from the main alley system. "We're going to backtrack and use this side route. It'll take us around the roadblock and put us in a position to search for the jamming site. Kim, can you use the radio to triangulate the source of the interference?" Kim nodded confidently. "If I can get close enough, I should be able to home in on the transmission source. Most jamming equipment has a distinctive electronic signature." The squad prepared to move again, but Rivera noticed that Thompson's condition was worsening. The young soldier was trying to hide it, but his left leg was clearly causing him significant pain. Rivera made a difficult decision. They couldn't afford to have Thompson slow them down during what would be a fast and dangerous movement. "Thompson, you're staying here to provide security for our fallback position," Rivera announced. "Set up overwatch on this alley and cover our withdrawal route. If we're not back in 30 minutes, you make your own way to Rally Point Bravo." Thompson started to protest, but Rivera cut him off with a look. The young soldier understood the tactical necessity of the decision, even if he didn't like being left behind. Thompson nodded and began setting up a defensive position in the shadows of the alley. Rivera's reduced squad of 7 men began their movement through the side passage, with Washington again taking point and Morales covering their rear. The passage was even narrower than the main alley system, forcing them to move in single file and making them vulnerable to ambush from above. Kim worked the radio as they moved, holding it low to minimize the electronic signature while trying to get a bearing on the jamming source. The interference seemed to be coming from the north, which would put it somewhere in the direction of the old marketplace Rivera had identified on his map. The side passage opened onto a small courtyard surrounded by damaged buildings. Rivera could see evidence of previous fighting in the area, bullet holes in walls, blast damage, and debris scattered everywhere. This had been a battlefield before, which meant there might be unexploded ordnances or booby traps in the area. Williams, who had received some training in explosive ordnance disposal, took the lead as they crossed the courtyard. He moved carefully, scanning for trip wires or suspicious objects that might indicate the presence of IEDs. The squad followed in his footsteps, trusting his expertise to guide them safely through the potential minefield. On the far side of the courtyard, Kim's radio suddenly crackled with much clearer reception. "Sergeant, the jamming just got weaker," Kim reported excitedly. "The source is definitely close, probably within 200 meters." Rivera felt a surge of hope. If they could locate and destroy the jamming equipment, they could call for air support and turn the tables on their pursuers. But they would need to move fast. The enemy forces searching for them wouldn't be far behind, and Thompson couldn't hold the fallback position indefinitely. The squad entered another section of the alley system, this one leading toward the old marketplace. Rivera could see vendor stalls and abandoned carts, evidence of civilian activity before the area became a war zone. The marketplace would provide good concealment, but it would also offer numerous hiding places for enemy fighters. Washington held up his hand again, signaling contact ahead. Through the entrance to the marketplace, Rivera could see two men with assault rifles standing guard near a building that had an unusual amount of antenna equipment on its roof. The jamming site was right in front of them, but it was protected by armed guards. Rivera quickly counted the guards and assessed their positions. Two visible guards, probably more inside the building with the antennas. The guards appeared alert, but not particularly concerned about immediate threats. They were probably confident that their radio jamming was preventing any coordinated response to their activities. "Morales, can you take both guards simultaneously?" Rivera whispered. Morales studied the targets through his rifle scope for several seconds before responding. "Affirmative, Sergeant. Clean shots from this position. But if there are more guards inside the building, they'll know we're here as soon as I pull the trigger." Rivera weighed their options. A sniper attack would eliminate the guards quickly and quietly, but it would also alert anyone inside the building. On the other hand, trying to approach the guards silently would risk being discovered before they could complete their mission. "Chun, Williams, you're with me for the assault on the building," Rivera decided. "Tank, you and Kim provide security and communications. Morales, wait for my signal, then take both guards. We'll need to move fast once the shooting starts." Rivera's small assault team prepared for what would be a crucial mission. If they could destroy the jamming equipment, they could call for air support and evacuate the area. If they failed, they would be trapped with no way to communicate with friendly forces and an increasing number of enemy fighters closing in on their position. Rivera checked his watch. They'd been behind enemy lines for over 4 hours, and the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Darkness would bring new challenges, but it would also provide concealment for their escape. Rivera hoped they could complete their mission and extract before nightfall complicated their situation even further. "Kim, as soon as we take down the jamming equipment, I want you on that radio calling for immediate air support," Rivera instructed. "Give them our coordinates and tell them we need close air support for enemy forces in this area." Kim nodded and prepared his radio equipment for rapid transmission. The communications specialist understood that he would have only a brief window to establish contact before enemy reinforcements arrived at their position. Rivera took one final look at his assault team. Chun was young but reliable, with good instincts and steady nerves under fire. Williams had medical training but was also competent with his rifle and could handle himself in combat. Washington and Morales were both experienced fighters who could provide effective overwatch and security. "Morales, you have the shot," Rivera whispered into his radio. "Take them down." The sharp crack of Morales's rifle echoed through the marketplace as both enemy guards dropped simultaneously. Rivera's assault team immediately burst from concealment and sprinted toward the building with the antenna equipment, knowing they had only seconds before the enemy inside responded to the gunfire. Rivera reached the building first and pressed himself against the wall beside the main entrance. He could hear voices shouting in Arabic from inside, confirming that there were additional enemy fighters in the building. Chun and Williams took positions on either side of Rivera, their rifles ready for the close-quarters combat that was about to begin. The door to the building suddenly flew open, and an insurgent with an AK-47 stepped out to investigate the gunfire. Rivera didn't hesitate. He fired 3 rounds center mass, dropping the fighter before he could raise his weapon. Chen immediately moved to clear the doorway while Williams provided cover. Inside the building, Rivera could see sophisticated radio equipment and electronic devices that were clearly the source of the jamming. But there were also at least 3 more enemy fighters, and they were preparing to defend their position. The real fight was just beginning. The interior of the building erupted in gunfire as Rivera's assault team engaged the enemy fighters protecting the jamming equipment. The space was cramped and filled with electronic gear, making movement difficult and creating dangerous ricochets. Rivera could see muzzle flashes from at least 3 positions as the insurgents returned fire from behind improvised cover. Chun moved left, using a stack of radio equipment as cover while engaging a fighter positioned near the back wall. The young soldier's training took over as he fired controlled bursts, forcing the enemy to keep his head down. Williams moved right, his medical training making him naturally cautious, but his rifle skills keeping him effective in the firefight. Rivera advanced straight through the center of the room, his rifle switching between targets as he identified threats. An insurgent appeared from behind a desk covered with electronic equipment, his AK-47 spraying bullets wildly in Rivera's direction. Rivera dove behind a metal cabinet and returned fire, his shot striking the fighter in the chest and shoulder. The sound of gunfire was deafening in the confined space, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. Rivera's ears were ringing, but his training kept him focused on the immediate threats. He could see that one of the enemy fighters was positioned directly next to the main jamming equipment, using it as cover while firing at Chen's position. "Williams, can you get an angle on the target behind the jamming gear?" Rivera shouted over the gunfire. Williams adjusted his position and fired 2 quick shots, but the insurgent was well protected by the electronic equipment. "Negative, Sergeant. Too much cover, and I don't want to damage the equipment before Kim can disable it." Rivera realized they needed to change tactics. The enemy fighters were using the jamming equipment as a fortress, and a prolonged firefight would risk destroying the very equipment they needed to capture intact. Rivera made a quick decision that would require perfect timing and coordination. "Chun, lay down suppressive fire on all targets," Rivera ordered. "Williams, you're with me. We're going to flank around the left side and take them from an angle they're not expecting." Chun immediately increased his rate of fire, forcing all 3 enemy fighters to take cover behind their respective positions. The young soldier burned through almost a full magazine in 30 seconds, but his suppressive fire gave Rivera and Williams the opportunity they needed to reposition. Rivera and Williams moved quickly along the left wall of the room, staying low and using damaged furniture as cover. The insurgents were focused on Chen's position and didn't notice the flanking movement until it was too late. Rivera appeared at the side of their defensive position and opened fire at close range. The firefight ended abruptly as the last enemy fighter fell. Rivera's ears continued ringing from the gunfire, but he could see that his assault team had successfully secured the building. Chun and Williams immediately began checking the bodies while Rivera examined the jamming equipment. The electronic setup was more sophisticated than Rivera had expected. Multiple radio transmitters, computer equipment, and antenna arrays filled most of the room. Someone with considerable technical expertise had assembled this jamming station, and it had clearly been operating for an extended period. "Kim, get in here and see what you can do with this equipment," Rivera called over his radio. Kim entered the building cautiously, his rifle ready despite the apparent end of the firefight. When he saw the extent of the electronic equipment, his eyes widened with surprise. "Sergeant, this is some serious hardware. Professional-grade jamming equipment, probably military surplus from somewhere." Rivera wasn't interested in the origins of the equipment. He just wanted it disabled so they could restore communications. "Can you shut it down and get our radio working?" Kim moved to the main control panel and began examining the various switches and indicators. "Give me 2 minutes, Sergeant. I need to identify the main power source and figure out how to disable the jamming signal without destroying everything." While Kim worked on the electronics, Rivera positioned Chun and Williams to provide security. Through the windows, he could see Washington and Morales maintaining their overwatch positions in the marketplace. So far, There was no sign of enemy reinforcements, but Rivera knew that wouldn't last long. "Williams, how's our ammunition situation?" Rivera asked while scanning for threats outside the building. Williams did a quick inventory of his remaining magazines. "I've got 2 full magazines left plus what's in the weapon. Chin's probably about the same. We can handle another firefight, but not a long one." Rivera nodded grimly. They were running low on everything: ammunition, time, and options. The successful capture of the jamming site was a significant victory, but they still needed to extract from enemy territory and reach the rally point. Every minute they spent in the area increased the risk of being surrounded by reinforcements. "Got it," Kim announced triumphantly from his position at the control panel. "Jamming is down, and I'm getting clear signals on multiple frequencies." Kim immediately began transmitting their situation to any friendly forces in the area. Any station, this is Bravo 7 requesting immediate assistance. We are 7 personnel at grid coordinates." Kim rattled off their precise location and their tactical situation. The response was immediate and welcome. "Bravo 7. This is Falcon 2-1. We have your position and are en route to provide close air support. Estimate 3 minutes to target area. Identify your position with signal mirror or smoke." Rivera felt a surge of relief. Air support would change everything. The enemy forces that had been hunting his squad would suddenly find themselves being hunted by attack aircraft with devastating firepower. Rivera pulled a signal mirror from his gear and moved to a window where he could signal the incoming aircraft. "Kim, tell Falcon 2-1 that we're in the building with the antennas on the roof. Enemy forces are scattered throughout the surrounding area, and we have 1 man wounded at grid coordinates." Rivera provided Thompson's location so the aircraft could avoid him during their attack runs. Kim relayed the information while Rivera continued scanning for threats. Through his binoculars, he could see enemy fighters moving between buildings in the distance. The insurgents had clearly heard the gunfire from the jamming site and were moving to investigate. Rivera counted at least a dozen fighters approaching from various directions. "Sergeant," Chin called from his position at the back window, "I've got movement in the building directly behind us. Looks like they're trying to set up firing positions." Rivera moved to Chin's position and confirmed the sighting. Enemy fighters were definitely positioning themselves for an assault on the jamming site. They probably understood the strategic importance of the equipment and were determined to retake it or destroy it. The sound of jet engines grew louder overhead as the air support arrived in the area. Rivera stepped outside and used his signal mirror to flash their position to the aircraft circling above. Almost immediately, the pilot's voice crackled over Kim's radio. "Bravo 7, we have visual on your signal. We're going to make gun runs on enemy positions around your location. Keep your heads down and stay in the building until we give you the all-clear." Rivera herded his team back inside the building just as the first aircraft began its attack run. The sound of the aircraft's cannon was like thunder, and Rivera could feel the building shake as high explosive rounds struck enemy positions in the surrounding area. Through the windows, he could see huge clouds of dust and debris being thrown into the air. The air attack continued for several minutes, with multiple aircraft taking turns to strike enemy positions. Rivera could hear secondary explosions as enemy ammunition supplies detonated under the aircraft fire. The insurgents who had been closing in on their position were being systematically eliminated by overwhelming firepower. "Bravo 7, this is Falcon 2-1. The pilot's voice came over the radio again. "We've neutralized multiple enemy positions in your area. We're getting low on fuel, but we've got another flight of aircraft coming to provide continuous air cover. What's your extraction plan?" Rivera quickly consulted his map and identified a suitable landing zone for helicopter extraction. "Falcon 2-1, we need helicopter extraction at the old soccer field, grid coordinates." Rivera provided the location of a clear area about 6 blocks from their current position. "Roger, Bravo 7. Dustoff is en route, and will be on station in approximately 10 minutes. Can you make it to the landing zone?" Rivera looked at his squad and made a quick assessment. They were all tired, running low on ammunition, and Thompson was still injured. But with air cover protecting their movement, they could definitely reach the landing zone. "Affirmative, Falcon 2-1. We'll be at the LZ in 10 minutes. Rivera began organizing his squad for their final movement to safety. The jamming equipment had served its purpose and could now be destroyed to prevent it from being used again. Kim quickly rigged an explosive charge using grenades and ammunition, setting a timer that would give them enough time to clear the area. "Williams, you take point for this movement," Rivera ordered. "Kim, you're right behind him with the radio. Chun, you're with me in the middle. Tank and Morales will provide rear security once we pick up Thompson." The squad prepared for their final push to the extraction point. Outside, Rivera could still hear the sound of aircraft providing overhead cover, and the occasional explosion as they eliminated remaining enemy threats. The air support had turned the tactical situation completely around, giving Rivera's squad the protection they needed to escape. Rivera took one last look around the jamming site that had been the key to their survival. The sophisticated equipment represented a significant enemy capability that would no longer threaten American forces in the area. More importantly, the successful mission had kept his squad alive and would allow them all to return to their families. "Let's go home," Rivera announced, and his squad moved out toward their extraction point. The movement through the streets was completely different with air cover overhead. Instead of sneaking through alleys and hiding from enemy patrols, Rivera's squad could move confidently through the most direct route to the landing zone. The aircraft circling overhead had eliminated or scattered the enemy forces, leaving the streets eerily quiet. They reached Thompson's position without incident and found the young soldier alert and ready to move. His leg was still causing him problems, but he was mobile and determined not to slow down the squad's movement to safety. "You miss anything interesting?" Thompson asked with a grin as the squad helped him to his feet. "Just a little fireworks show," Rivera replied, returning the grin. "Nothing you haven't seen before." The squad continued toward the landing zone, with Williams supporting Thompson and helping him maintain the pace. Rivera could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors in the distance, growing louder as their extraction aircraft approached the area. As they reached the edge of the soccer field that would serve as their landing zone, Rivera could see the helicopter approaching from the south. It was a beautiful sight, their ticket home after hours of being trapped behind enemy lines. But Rivera's relief was short-lived. As they moved into the open area of the landing zone, rifle fire erupted from a building at the far end of the field. Enemy fighters who had survived the air attacks were making one last attempt to prevent the squad's extraction. Rivera's squad immediately took cover at the edge of the field, but they were caught in the open with nowhere to hide. The helicopter was still 2 minutes away, and the enemy fire was accurate and intense. Rivera realized they would need to fight their way to the extraction point, and someone was probably going to get hurt. The enemy fire from the building at the far end of the soccer field was devastating in its accuracy. Rivera's squad was pinned down behind a low concrete wall that bordered the landing zone, with bullets striking the ground around them and chipping away pieces of their minimal cover. The helicopter circling overhead couldn't land with enemy fighters in position to shoot down the aircraft. Rivera assessed their situation quickly. The building containing the enemy fighters was approximately 200 meters away, well within effective range for their rifles, but too far for accurate fire with their limited ammunition. The helicopter pilot was maintaining a safe distance, waiting for the landing zone to be cleared before attempting the extraction. "Falcon 2-1, we need immediate fire support on the building at the north end of the landing zone," Rivera called into Kim's radio. "Enemy fighters are preventing our extraction." The pilot's response was immediate, but disappointing. "Bravo 7, we're Winchester on cannon rounds and low on fuel. We've got to RTB for rearm and refuel. Another flight is en route, but won't be here for 15 minutes. Rivera felt his heart sink. 15 minutes was an eternity when pinned down under enemy fire. They couldn't wait for air support, and they couldn't extract with hostile forces controlling the landing zone. Rivera would have to find another solution with the resources immediately available. "Morales, can you reach that building with accurate fire?" Rivera asked his sharpshooter. Morales studied the target through his rifle scope, calculating distance and wind conditions. "It's at the edge of my effective range, Sergeant, but I can probably hit targets in the windows. Problem is, I can't see how many fighters are in there or exactly where they're positioned." Rivera realized they needed to get closer to the enemy position to be effective, But crossing the open ground of the soccer field would be suicidal under the current circumstances. He needed a way to suppress the enemy fire long enough for his squad to advance to a better position. Washington crawled over to Rivera's position, dragging his wounded arm, but still carrying his rifle. "Sergeant, what if we create a diversion? If some of us can draw their fire in one direction, the others might be able to flank around and get close enough for effective shots." Rivera considered the plan. It was risky, but it might be their best option under the circumstances. The key would be timing and coordination. Whoever served as the diversion would be extremely vulnerable while the flanking element moved into position. "Tank, you and Kim stay here and provide covering fire," Rivera decided. "When I give the signal, lay down everything you've got on that building. Morales, Chun, Williams, and Thompson are with me. We're going around the left side of the field and getting close enough to take out those shooters." Rivera's flanking team prepared for what would be a dangerous movement across partially exposed ground. Thompson was struggling with his injured leg, but he insisted he could keep up with the squad's movement. Williams stayed close to Thompson, ready to provide medical assistance if needed. "On my mark, tank," Rivera called out. "Give us 30 seconds of the heaviest fire you can manage." Washington and Kim prepared their weapons, knowing they would need to make every shot count. Their covering fire would mask the sound of Rivera's movement and hopefully force the enemy fighters to take cover long enough for the flanking element to reach a better position. "Mark," Rivera shouted, and Washington opened up with rapid semi-automatic fire while Kim added his rifle to the volume of shots directed at the enemy building. Rivera's flanking team immediately began moving along the left side of the soccer field, using a drainage ditch for concealment. The ditch was only about 2 feet deep, but it provided enough cover to hide their movement from the enemy fighters focused on Washington and Kim's position. The team moved as quickly as Thompson's injured leg would allow, covering about 50 meters before the covering fire stopped. Rivera could hear enemy rifles responding to Washington's fire, confirming that there were multiple fighters in the building. But the enemy hadn't noticed Rivera's flanking movement, which meant they still had the element of surprise. Rivera's team reached a position about 100 meters from the enemy building, close enough for accurate rifle fire, but still concealed in the drainage ditch. Through gaps in the concrete retaining wall, Rivera could see muzzle flashes from at least 3 windows in the building. "Morales, you take the window on the left," Rivera whispered. "Chun, center window. Williams, your backup for whoever needs it. Thompson, stay low and provide rear security. We'll take all targets simultaneously on my count." Rivera's marksmen prepared their shots, each man identifying his target and adjusting for distance and wind. This would be their only chance to eliminate the enemy fighters before they realized they were under attack from a new direction. 3, 2, 1, fire. 3 rifles cracked almost simultaneously, and Rivera saw bodies fall in the windows of the enemy building. But return fire immediately erupted from other positions they hadn't identified, forcing Rivera's team to take cover in the drainage ditch. "I got my target," Morales reported calmly. "But there are at least 2 more in there." Chun confirmed his hit as well, but Williams reported that he'd seen movement in a ground floor window that they hadn't identified earlier. The enemy had more fighters than Rivera had initially estimated, and they were now aware of the flanking attack. Rivera realized they needed to finish this quickly. The longer the firefight continued, the more likely it was that additional enemy reinforcements would arrive. The extraction helicopter was still circling at a safe distance, and Rivera knew the pilot wouldn't wait indefinitely. "We're going to assault the building," Rivera announced to his team. "Morales and Chun, provide covering fire. Williams and Thompson, you're with me. We're going to sprint to the building and clear it room by room." It was a desperate plan, but Rivera couldn't see any other options. They were running out of time, ammunition, and alternatives. The enemy position had to be neutralized immediately, even if it meant taking significant risks. Rivera's assault team prepared for their final charge across the open ground between their position and the enemy building. It was approximately 50 meters of completely exposed terrain, and they would be vulnerable to enemy fire for the entire distance. "Covering fire now," Rivera shouted, and Morales and Chun began engaging the enemy windows with rapid, accurate fire. Rivera burst from the drainage ditch with Williams and Thompson right behind him. The distance to the building felt enormous as they sprinted across the open ground. But Rivera's focus was entirely on reaching cover before the enemy could respond effectively. Bullets whined past Rivera's head as the enemy fighters returned fire, but the covering fire from Morales and Chun was forcing them to shoot quickly without proper aim. Rivera reached the wall of the building and pressed himself against it, breathing heavily from the sprint and the adrenaline. Williams arrived next, his medical training having taught him to stay calm under extreme stress. Thompson was the last to reach the building, his injured leg causing him to stumble, but he made it to cover without being hit. Rivera moved to the main entrance of the building while Williams and Thompson covered the windows. The door was partially open, and Rivera could hear voices speaking Arabic inside. At least 2 enemy fighters were still alive and active inside the building. Rivera pulled a fragmentation grenade from his vest and prepared to clear the interior of the building. It was a brutal tactic, but it was the fastest way to neutralize the remaining threats and secure the landing zone for extraction. "Frag out," Rivera shouted, pulling the pin and throwing the grenade through the doorway. The explosion shook the building and filled the interior with smoke and debris. Rivera immediately followed up with his rifle, moving through the doorway and engaging any targets that had survived the grenade blast. The interior of the building was devastated by the explosion, with damaged furniture and debris scattered everywhere. Rivera could see one enemy fighter down near the back wall, clearly killed by the grenade. But there was still movement in a side room, indicating at least one more threat remained active. Williams followed Rivera into the building, his rifle ready to engage any remaining enemies. The 2 soldiers moved carefully through the smoke and debris, clearing each room systematically. In the side room, they found one wounded enemy fighter who was no longer capable of resistance. Building clear, Rivera called out to his team outside. "Williams, get that pilot on the radio and tell him we're ready for extraction." Rivera's squad quickly regrouped at the now secured landing zone as the extraction helicopter descended toward the soccer field. The pilot had been monitoring their assault and was ready to land as soon as Rivera confirmed the area was safe. But as the helicopter touched down and Rivera's squad began moving toward it, a new problem emerged. Thompson collapsed halfway to the aircraft, his injured leg finally giving out completely. The young soldier had pushed himself beyond his physical limits, and his body was shutting down from exhaustion and pain. Williams immediately moved to Thompson's position, his medical training taking over as he assessed the soldier's condition. "His leg is badly swollen, and I think he might have a stress fracture. He needs immediate medical attention." Rivera realized that Thompson wouldn't be able to walk to the helicopter under his own power. Someone would have to carry him, which would slow down their extraction and potentially expose the entire squad to enemy fire if more insurgents arrived in the area. "Tank, Morales, help me get Thompson to the bird," Rivera ordered, moving to assist with the evacuation. But Thompson surprised everyone by struggling to his feet and waving off their assistance. "I can make it, Sergeant. I'm not leaving my rifle behind, and I'm walking to that helicopter on my own." Rivera started to argue, but he could see the determination in Thompson's eyes. The young soldier had been through hell with the rest of the squad, and he wasn't going to be carried to safety like an invalid. Rivera decided to respect Thompson's wishes while staying close enough to help if needed. Thompson limped toward the helicopter, supported by Williams, but maintaining his dignity and carrying his own weapon. The rest of the squad provided security around the landing zone, scanning for any signs of enemy activity that might threaten their extraction. As Rivera's squad reached the helicopter, a young medic jumped out to help with Thompson's evacuation. The medic was probably no more than 19 years old, with nervous energy and eager expressions that reminded Rivera of his own early deployments. But when the medic spoke, Rivera felt his world shift in a way he couldn't immediately understand. "Sergeant Rivera," the young medic called out over the noise of the helicopter rotors. "I'm here to help with your wounded. The doc says to tell you that Eagle 7 sends his regards." Rivera froze. Eagle 7 was the call sign of his first squad leader in Afghanistan, a man who had died in an IED explosion 6 years earlier. Only the soldiers who had served in that squad knew the significance of that call sign, and it had never been used officially in any records. Rivera stared at the young medic, trying to process what he'd just heard. How could this kid possibly know about Eagle 7? Who had sent that message, and what did it mean? But there was no time for questions. The helicopter pilot was urgently signaling for them to board immediately, and Rivera could see dust clouds in the distance that suggested enemy vehicles were approaching their location. Rivera helped load Thompson into the helicopter while his mind raced with questions about the mysterious message. As the aircraft lifted off and carried them to safety, Rivera realized that this mission was far from over. Someone out there knew things about his past that should have been buried with the dead, and they had chosen this moment to reach out to him. The wounded operator was safe, but Rivera sensed that his real challenges were just beginning.